The late afternoon sun painted the Marina district of San Francisco in hues of gold. Its warm rays shimmered on the tranquil waters of the bay, while the faint, salty tang of the sea mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly cut grass. The nearby park buzzed with life. Joggers moved in rhythmic strides along the pathways, their sneakers softly crunching on the gravel. Dog walkers exchanged cheerful conversation as their pets tugged at leashes, tails wagging energetically. Children's laughter echoed from a playground in the distance, blending into the hum of a typical day in the city. Amidst this lively scene, a peculiar sense of stillness hung over a lone bench near the water's edge. It was here that Keanu Reeves sat quietly, seemingly untouched by the bustling activity around him. Dressed in an unremarkable gray hoodie and a pair of dark jeans, he looked far removed from the bright lights of Hollywood. A simple black baseball cap partially obscured his face, its brim casting a faint shadow over his serene expression. To anyone passing by, he appeared as just another local savoring a rare moment of solitude. Beside him on the bench rested a steaming cup of coffee, wisps of warmth curling lazily into the cool afternoon air. His fingers gently held the edges of an old paperback novel, its pages slightly yellowed from years of wear. The book's cover bore no flashy title, just the muted tones of something well-loved and well-read. As he flipped through its pages, his movements were deliberate and unhurried. It was as if time itself slowed in his presence, the ceaseless motion of the world pausing briefly in deference to the quiet man on the bench. Keanu Reeves was one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, yet here, in this pocket of the city, he was invisible. His unassuming presence and understated demeanor allowed him to blend seamlessly into the park's landscape. A handful of people strolled past him, some engrossed in their phones, others chatting animatedly with companions. None of them spared him a second glance, their gazes sweeping past as if he were just another figure enjoying the Golden Gate Bridge's picturesque backdrop. Keanu's posture exuded an almost meditative calm, his shoulders relaxed, and his attention fixed on the book in his hands. A light breeze teased the edges of his hoodie, ruffling his hair as he turned another page. Every so often he reached for his coffee, taking small sips before returning it to the bench with quiet precision. His lips curled faintly, not quite a smile, but enough to suggest contentment. The park around him seemed a world away from the red carpets and flashing cameras that marked so much of his life. Here, there were no fans clamoring for autographs, no directors issuing demands, no interviews dissecting his thoughts. There was only the gentle rhythm of the waves lapping at the shore, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional bark of a dog chasing a ball. Keanu Reeves, the global superstar, had found an oasis of anonymity, a fleeting reprieve from the relentless glare of fame. In many ways, this scene captured the essence of Keanu Reeves. Despite his immense fame and fortune, he was known for his humility, kindness, and a simplicity that set him apart from his peers. His fans revered him not only for his on-screen charisma, but also for the quiet generosity and empathy he displayed in real life. Stories of his kindness were legendary. The time he gave up his seat on a crowded subway, the secret donations he made to children's hospitals, the pay cuts he took to ensure his colleagues were compensated fairly. But today, there were no grand gestures. There was just Keanu, a man enjoying an ordinary afternoon, immersing himself in the pages of a story. To him, this moment of solitude was likely as valuable as any blockbuster film or award ceremony. It was a reminder that even amidst the chaos of stardom, there could be peace in the simple pleasures of life. A good book, a cup of coffee, and a quiet bench by the water. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, its golden glow deepened into rich amber tones, Shadows lengthened across the park, their shapes stretching and shifting with the fading light. Keanu seemed unfazed by the changing scenery, his focus unwavering. The world might have been turning around him, but for now, his universe was contained within the worn pages of his book. It wasn't long before the rhythm of the park shifted. As the evening drew closer, the bustling energy of the day gave way to a quieter, more reflective atmosphere. Joggers slowed to a walk, their breath misting in the cooling air. Families began packing up picnic blankets, children reluctantly leaving their games behind. The once crowded pathways thinned out, and the park's vibrant chatter softened into a gentle hum. In this quieter hour, Keanu remained on his bench, a solitary figure amidst the fading activity. His stillness was interrupted only when a man approached from the side, his clothes worn and his face weathered by years of hardship. The man hesitated for a moment, standing a short distance away, as if unsure whether to continue. Gathering his courage, he finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Hey, man, could you spare $1?" Keanu looked up from his book, his eyes meeting the man's. There was no irritation, no dismissiveness, only a quiet attentiveness that invited the man to speak without fear of judgment. What followed was a conversation that would change the trajectory of the man's life and further cement Keanu Reeves's reputation as a figure of quiet compassion and generosity. When a homeless man asked Keanu Reeves for just $1, he never expected the legendary actor's life-changing response. It was a late afternoon when the sun cast a golden glow over San Francisco's Marina District, its warm light glinting off the rippling waters of the bay. The air carried the faint tang of salt, mingling with the earthy scent of freshly mown grass from the park near the Golden Gate Bridge. Joggers passed by in rhythmic strides, dog walkers chatted idly, and children's laughter rang out from the nearby playground. Yet amidst the lively scene, there was a pocket of solitude. Keanu Reeves sat on a worn wooden bench near the edge of the park, facing the water dressed in a plain gray hoodie and dark jeans. He looked every bit like any other local, enjoying a moment of peace. His face partially obscured by the hood, and a simple black baseball cap radiated a quiet contentment. A cup of coffee rested on the bench beside him, and an old paperback novel sat open in his hands. He glanced down at the sign and sighed. His pride made the act of holding it out unbearable, but hunger left him no choice. His stomach growled audibly, reminding him it had been over 24 hours since he'd eaten anything substantial. He scanned the park, searching for a face that seemed approachable. But most people walked briskly by their attention on their phones or their companions. Then his eyes landed on Keanu. There was something about him, his relaxed posture, his calm energy that made Mike pause. He didn't recognize him as a famous actor to Mike. Keanu was simply a man who seemed kind. For several minutes, Mike wrestled with himself. Should he approach? What if the man shooed him away as so many others had done? Or, worse, what if he ignored him entirely, like he wasn't even there? Mike's gaze shifted back to his empty hands, and then to the man on the bench. Desperation noted at his resolve, and before he could second-guess himself, he took a step forward. The walk across the park felt longer than it should have. Every step weighted with hesitation. Mike's heart thudded in his chest as he approached the man on the bench, his fingers clutching the edges of his cardboard sign like a lifeline he considered turning back the thought of another rejection too much to bear. But his hunger overruled his pride. The man on the bench didn't notice him at first, engrossed in the book resting on his lap. Mike cleared his throat softly, testing the waters. But no sound came out. Finally, he forced himself to speak. His voice, barely audible. "Excuse me, sir." Keanu looked up, lowering the book slightly. his eyes meeting Mike's. They were kind eyes, calm and steady, but their attention made Mike want to shrink away for a moment. Neither of them spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath as Mike stood there, clutching his sign and trembling slightly under Keanu's curious gaze. "Can you spare $1?" Mike asked, his voice breaking slightly. On the last word, he shifted uncomfortably, the vulnerability of the question making him feel exposed. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. He didn't respond right away, instead, studying Mike with a quiet intensity that made time seem to stretch. Mike fidgeted his fingers, drumming nervously against the cardboard. He was about to apologize, to mumble something about not wanting to bother him, when Keanu finally spoke. "$1," Keanu said, his voice low, and even with no hint of judgment, he set the book aside and leaned back slightly as though giving Mike the space to gather himself. "What would you do with it?" The question caught Mike off guard. Most people either ignored him outright or shoved a handful of loose change in his direction before hurrying away. No one had ever asked why Mike hesitated, his words tumbling over each other as he tried to explain, I just need something to eat. I haven't eaten all day. I don't want to ask, but He trailed off, his face flushed with shame. Keanu nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Then, with a faint smile, he gestured to the empty spot on the bench beside him. "Sit down," he said. "Let's talk." Mike froze, unsure if he had heard correctly. He stared at Keanu, searching his face for any sign of mockery, but all he found was calm sincerity. Slowly, almost cautiously, Mike shuffled forward and sat down, his cardboard sign resting awkwardly on his lap. "Thanks, Mike," murmured his voice, barely above a whisper. For the first time in years, someone had asked him to stay, instead of hurrying him along. What Mike didn't know was that his decision to sit down was about to change his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. Keanu slowly closed the paperback in his hands, his thumb marking the page as he looked up at the man standing before him. The air seemed to shift slightly, the quiet hum of the park. Fading into the background, his calm dark eyes met Mike's steady and unhurried, taking in the details that told a story. Without words, Mike's weathered face, the tremor in his hands as they clutched the edge of his cardboard sign, the way his shoulders seemed to sag under an invisible weight. It was all there lay bare in the few seconds of silence that followed. For Mike, those seconds felt like hours. His instinct was to retreat, to avoid the scrutiny of those sharp yet kind eyes. He glanced down, his gaze settling on his shoes, which were scuffed and riddled with holes. "I'm sorry," he muttered, the words tumbling out quickly. "I didn't mean to bother you. I just—" Keanu raised a hand, gently stopping him. Mid-sentence, "No need to apologize," he said, his voice calm and even like a breeze cutting through the stillness. He leaned back on the bench, tilting his head slightly, as he regarded Mike with a curious expression. Then he asked why $1. The question caught Mike off guard. He blinked, looking back at Keanu, unsure how to respond. Most people didn't ask questions. They either ignored him completely or gave him a few coins without meeting his eyes. This was different. He felt seen, and it was unnerving. I just need enough to get something to eat." Mike finally stammered, his voice raw. "I'm not trying to ask for much. I don't want to impose." He looked away, his face flushing with shame. Keanu didn't say anything right away. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if turning Mike's words over in his mind. His expression didn't hold pity or judgment, just a quiet thoughtfulness that put Mike slightly at ease. The silence hung between them for a moment. Long and then Keanu did something Mike didn't expect. He placed the book beside him on the bench, crossed one leg over the other, and smiled faintly. It was a small smile, but it carried warmth. $1 might not go very far. Keanu said, "How about this? Why don't we get you something to eat right now?" Mike blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. He stared at Keanu, trying to gauge whether this was some kind of joke. But Keanu's face was calm, his words genuine. "I mean it," Keanu continued. "There's a diner just a couple blocks away. Let's grab something." My treat, Mike's instinct was to refuse the idea of sitting down to a meal with a stranger, especially one who seemed so calm and put together, felt almost absurd. "I don't know," he mumbled, stepping back slightly. "You don't have to do that. I mean, I was just asking for $1." Keanu leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I know," he said, his tone soft but firm. "But how about this? You let me do this, and in return, you tell me your story, deal?" Mike hesitated, his pride wed with his hunger, and for a moment he almost turned and walked away. But there was something in Keanu's expression, something open and sincere, that made it hard to refuse. Mike's stomach growled audibly, breaking the silence, and he sighed in resignation. "Okay," he said quietly. I guess that's fair." Keanu stood up, towering slightly over Mike, and gestured toward the sidewalk. "Great, let's go." The two walked together through the park and onto the bustling streets of the Marina District. Mike kept his head down, acutely aware of the curious glances from passers-by. He was used to being stared at, but this was different. This time, he wasn't alone. Keanu, for his part, seemed unfazed by the attention. He walked, with a relaxed confidence, hands tucked casually into his hoodie, pockets occasionally glancing over to make sure Mike was keeping pace. "You okay?" he asked after a few minutes. Mike nodded, though he didn't entirely believe his own answer. "Yeah, just not used to this." Keanu chuckled softly. "Used to what people?" "Noticing me," Mike admitted. Keanu's smile widened slightly. "Well, let's change that today." They reached a small, cozy diner tucked into the corner of the street. The neon sign in the window read, "Opened 24 hours," in flickering red letters. Keanu held the door open, and Mike hesitated before stepping inside, the warmth of the diner enveloping him immediately as they slid into a booth near the window. The waitress approached with a welcoming smile. "What can I get you?" she asked. Keanu gestured toward Mike. "Order whatever you want," he said. Mike glanced at the menu, his hands trembling slightly for the first time in what felt like forever. He wasn't thinking about what he could afford. He was thinking about what he wanted, and that small, simple moment felt life-changing. The smell of sizzling burgers and crispy fries filled the small diner, creating a comforting warmth that contrasted with the chill Mike had grown accustomed to on the streets. He sat across from Keanu, nervously fidgeting with the edge of the napkin in front of him. The plate of food that had just arrived, stacked high with a burger, fries, and a side of claw, looked like a feast for a moment. Mike wasn't sure if he could eat, but the hunger in his stomach soon took over. "Don't wait for me," Keanu said, nodding toward Mike's plate as he picked up his own burger. His tone was casual, almost as if this was a routine lunch with a friend. Mike hesitated before taking his first bite. The warmth of the food melted away some of the tension in his body for a few moments. There was nothing but the sound of eating, broken occasionally by the hum of the diner's chatter. Then Keanu sat down his burger and leaned back, his eyes resting on Mike with a gentle curiosity. So Keanu began, his tone soft but inviting. "What's your story, Mike?" Mike froze mid-bite, setting his burger down. Slowly, he wasn't used to the question. Most people didn't ask, and those who did rarely stuck around long enough to hear the answer. He wiped his hands on the napkin, buying himself a few seconds to think, "I don't know where to start." Mike avoiding Keanu's gaze. "Start wherever feels right," Keanu said, nodding in encouragement, taking a deep breath. Mike began, He told Keanu how he used to work as a construction foreman, leading a team that built houses and office buildings. "I was good at it," Mike said, his voice carrying a flicker of pride. "I knew how to manage people, get things done on time, but then a workplace accident left him with a back injury that made it impossible to keep up with the physical demands of the job. I thought I'd get back on my feet." Mike continued, his voice growing quieter. "I had savings, but medical bills ate through that faster than I ever thought possible. Then the recession hit, and the work dried up." He paused, staring down at the table. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was out of options. Lost my apartment, my car, everything. Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful but free of pity. "That sounds like a tough break," he said softly. "It was Mike," said his voice cracking, "but I should have handled it better. I should have, I don't know, found a way to fix it." Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Sounds like you tried," he said. "Life doesn't always play fair. Mike, but you're here now. And that says something about you." Mike looked up, startled. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, like he was someone worth believing in. For the first time in years, he felt seen as Mike's words hung in the air. Keanu took a sip of his coffee and leaned back in his seat. His face softened, and for a moment he seemed to look past Mike as if lost in a memory. "You know," Keanu began, his voice quieter now, "I've had my share of struggles too, Mike. Like this video? Then, like this video, also subscribe this channel. Also, comment down about your thoughts.